So guys, EFK here, one more chance. Today we're talking about something a little bit weird, a little bit different. We're talking about like a hypothetical situation, basically, whether or not Sega would end up ever trying to acquire Atari, and whether it's going to happen. Now, we know Atari's not for sale at the minute. We obviously know Wade Rosen tried to make a bid on Atari to to acquire a majority stake, and obviously the investors turned him down. But this is a hypothetical due to the Sega deal to purchase Rovio Entertainment. So I want to do this hypothetical video talking about, could Sega pull off a deal? Would it be a good deal for Sega and all that sort of stuff? But I also want to bring up the fact that I do own a stake in Atari at the time of making this video, so I am a little bit biased. That's disclosure out of the way. So take everything I say with a pinch of salt. So let's get in. So Sega, for those you don't know, has made bank over the past few decades based on its library of classic games. Some of the more notable games in their portfolio include stuff like Yakuza, Sonic the Hedgehog, Streets of Rage, and Persona. Right, those are some pretty big names. A lot of them started in the 90s and some even in the 80s, and they just kept going. They kept building on their library over the years. They've obviously made a bid to acquire Rovio Entertainment, who makes the Angry Birds games, and Sega is obviously it's clearly in mode to try and grow. They obviously want to push into mobile. They want to push into new markets and try and like conquer more gaming assets. But people will look at what I'm saying, like, well, why would they buy Atari? Atari's losing money. Atari's not a major publisher. And that is true. Atari's not a major publisher anymore. Atari is very small compared to its competition. It's very small compared to someone like Sega. You know, people say Sega's a major AAA publisher, and Sega isn't as big as the big ones like Activision and EA. So that's kind of mad. Now, why would Sega make a bid for Atari? Now, I feel like if Sega was to make a bid for Atari, we would hear about it all over the news, and it'd be quite a lucrative deal for Atari and Atari shareholders like myself, but not so much Sega. Why? Well, you got to look at Atari's business model. Atari has four main pillars of its business model, those being video games, blockchain, merchandising, and licensing. Right? So, obviously, gaming is the big part for them. Gaming is the big thing where they need to bring in most revenue, because that's what Atari is. Atari is a game company. You know, Atari's got to make money off their video games, but obviously, gaming as a whole for Atari isn't really doing that well at the minute. Obviously, they're making about €3 million a year, I think it is, from their sales. But in doing so, they're also losing €6 million per year. Obviously making the games and operating income and whatnot. So that's unfortunate. That's a huge red flag to me. Atari's market cap as well, if you look on like any trading site, it seems to be less than €50 million, which is very small compared to the likes of what Sega just paid for Rovio. Rovio has obviously Sega's paid $1 billion for Rovio, which is about €900 million. So Sega could most probably pick up Atari for chump change, spare change and whatnot, if they so desired. But then you also got to look at the other initiatives in Atari, stuff like Atari X, which is their blockchain initiative, is a weird initiative to think about because Sega has made comments about making blockchain games. They said that they've got one in development, they've got Virtual Fighter NFTs in development, but that's really it. Sega's not really done much of NFTs and whatnot. When NFTs are, I'm not a fan of crypto and whatnot, but I do feel like Sega might use Atari X as a way to like push their first load of NFTs, see how well Atari NFTs do, and then see how well their own ones would do if they continue to push into that market. Anyway, another one is hardware. Hardware with the Atari VCS may not be a huge thing that Sega would want to proceed with. The VCS obviously hasn't sold as well as people hoped, and for someone like Sega, getting back in the console market doesn't seem to have much point for them, especially when they make billions and billions annually from selling games on PlayStation, Xbox, Switch, and Steam. Now, with all that said, would Sega make a bid? I'm not entirely sure. For those who know, Sega's business model, at least when it comes to acquiring companies, seems to be to acquire companies that help either expand its portfolio or expand its presence in certain markets. For those who don't know, if you look at Sega's history of acquisitions, 2005 they bought Sports Interactive and Creative Assembly to help push into into PC gaming, where obviously Sega is now a huge name. Sega's quite big in PC gaming compared to what they were. But remember, up until that point, they was only really big in console gaming. In 2009, they made a bid to acquire Atlas. Atlas being the house behind Shin Megami Tensei and Persona, and being a much needed addition to Sega to obviously grow its brand, grow its library, and grow its value as a company. Because obviously Persona sells like hotcakes. And then you've got companies like 2 Point Studios who make 2 Point Hospital, when they made 2 Point Campus, which are more smaller scale games, more smaller games which are pretty fun. They're fun little management games. They're great. And Sega literally used an incubator to obviously make new IPs to buy the studio. Rovio is obviously a big deal they're doing at the minute, where they're buying into this company who's a mobile game publisher and owns Angry Birds. And Angry Birds is probably the last. Oh, I think Angry Birds is one of like 2 or 3 major mobile game franchises which hasn't been acquired by a major publisher yet. So that's why Rovio makes a lot of sense for the purchase price. With Atari is bleeding money in a lot of ways. More than one, obviously, they're not really selling many games, and well, Atari would benefit more from Sega than people would first think, because Sega would obviously be able to take on their library, distribution. Sega's done such a good job with obviously re-releasing Mega Drive and Master System games, or Mega System and Genesis games, but Sega seems to struggle with some other games in its portfolio, with them not really bothering to re-release games from their other systems like the Sega Saturn, Dreamcast, Game Gear, or Master System. Nor have they really delved into re-releasing games from the Sega Pico line of edutainment consoles, which were popular in the 90s. To me, I feel like a Sega Atari deal, I know it's hypothetical, this isn't confirmed or anything, would be an interesting deal, but also then begs the question, like, why would Sega want to buy another developer or another publisher? Sega obviously makes a lot of money from its pachinko business and whatnot. That's where a majority of Sega's funds come from. But Sega wouldn't necessarily need Atari. Atari sort of needs Sega more than Sega needs Atari, because obviously Sega can provide funding to Atari's remakes and Recharge series, more Rokus Tycoon stuff, and whatnot. But it would come down to like whether Sega sees value in trying to acquire Atari, because I know back in like the 80s, and I think it was the 80s, Sega tried to make a deal with Atari to actually release the Genesis in the US under the Atari brand, and it never happened. It never worked out. The deal never went through. So to me, it's quite a weird thing to think about, because Sega is worth a lot more than Atari in a lot of ways. To fans, obviously, Sega's got a huge portfolio of games for you to play, whether you're on Steam, Xbox, PlayStation, whatever. They also have fan favorite franchises like Yakuza, Sonic, Persona, Total War, and there's tons of stuff in Sega's catalogue. And whilst I don't doubt Atari would be something that Sega may look into in the future, especially because Atari's got quite a big portfolio, it begs the question, would Sega want to take on the risk of buying Atari if Atari's even for sale? Because Sega, was once a competitor to Atari, which would be kind of sweet irony, but also the fact that Sega seems to be looking at growing for strategic acquisitions rather than just acquiring for the sake of acquiring. However, we are on a point of gaming now where it seems like every company is trying to bulk up in a lot of ways. Sony's bulking at Microsoft, EA's looking for stuff. Everyone's looking for studios and publishers to add to their growing portfolios. And honestly, I don't know if Sega would buy Atari, if they'd even be interested, but it could be something they would do look into in the future. Anyway, guys, let me know your thoughts about this in the comments down below. Do you agree? Do you disagree? Do you think Sega will buy Atari? Do you think Sega will make a bid on Atari? Do you reckon Atari would sell to Sega? Let me know your thoughts. Obviously, I'm an investor in Atari. I'm a little bit biased. Would like to see Sega make a bid on Atari. Yeah, I think Sega would be good for the Atari brand and would obviously help revitalize a lot of their franchises to a new audience. But that's all to see what happens. Anyway, guys, if you're new, make sure you subscribe, like, share, comment, and notifications. I've been Heathgate. I'm signing out. Peace.